Do you feel like an outsider in the entrepreneurial crowd? Even feel like an outsider in the ADHD entrepreneurial world? Well, maybe you have a driven brain. Joining me today is Dr. Doug Brackman, who's a psychologist specializing in helping highly driven individuals take control of their lives. He's also the author of Driven: Understanding and Harnessing Your Genetic Gifts. And he's going to join us today to discuss his book, Driven. Doug, thank you for coming on today.
It is a great pleasure to be here, Andre. Looking forward to this.
Me too. I gotta say, your book it was an eye opener for me outside the ADHD world. This really explained why I will never be satisfied, is for one. And I thought it was a really good topic because there's a lot of nuances between an ADHD brain and the driven brain. And this is episode 1 of season 4. So this year, I want to start discussing the nuances between an ADHD brain and other parts, and that ADHD is not the only thing affecting everything. So maybe you'll start off a little bit of background yourself and then go right into what is a driven person.
I am a driven, the running joke is that, if anyone ever tells you they get into psychology not to figure their own crap out, they're lying.
Yeah.
So I got into it to figure myself out. And it has been a phenomenal time to be a psychologist. So I'm a licensed psychologist, state of California. I have 2 PhDs, PhD in clinical psychology and a PhD in organizational psychology, business psych. Planned on doing executive coaching from way back when. I mean, I had no idea I'd wind up here, but I am driven. And so when I entered grad school in 1991, a Time magazine article came out that said, "We have found it. We found the alcoholism addictive gene." And that was dopamine receptor number 2, DRD2-A1 allele gene. And that was, 35 years ago. So it was misunderstood how genetics actually work. We thought it was more like a code. And if this code is there, then you have it. Right. We understand epigenetics. Epigenetics is, the exploration of the interaction between nature and nurture. Right. And so we used to think, is it nature, genetics, or is it nurture, how you were raised? Now that question has been put to rest. The answer is always yes. You cannot separate nature and nurture anymore. So, but it set my course on really trying to understand why I always felt different. I always felt like I saw the world a little bit differently. I was born in 1968 and missed the ADD, ADHD curve in the world of that. So when I was in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, why can't little Dougie sit still so much, and why does he get bored so easily, and why is he always doodling, and why is he doing these things? It was, it's just because I was a little different, and that didn't understand why I was different. But and then ADD and ADHD, as a psychologist, I can speak directly to that, in that ADD or ADHD is not a diagnosis. It's a list of symptoms that cluster together in the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual. So I affectionately call it the Big Book of Crazy. But it doesn't talk about any underlying reason or cause.
Right.
It just is literally a list of symptoms. And, you can thank Western medicine for that. And if we make the symptoms go away, then you no longer have the disorder.
Correct.
And that is a crime against humanity, but it makes a lot of money for pill pushers. But so I dove deep into it and really ran across a guy named Tom Hartman, and he wrote a book about
the hunters in a farmer's world.
Hunters in a farmer's world, and it blew my mind.
Me too.
Like, whoa, this is it. Yeah. And he actually spoke with him way back in the day, 15 years ago, when I was really getting into this stuff, just beginning this stuff. He has since fallen out of it, no longer is part of any of it. But he had an ADD, ADHD kid that was being ostracized and pushed out of the school system. And, you have a problem. Why don't you fit in? And he, as a news anchor and actually somebody who was very smart, looked at it and said, there must be a reason for this, the genetics behind it or something. There's Darwin's a pretty smart guy. There's not, it can't be just everyone conform and fit in. If you don't fit in, you have a disorder. So he spoke against the underlying issue with our medical model back then. He followed it up with a book called The Edison Gene, which really, the Edison gene is just a brilliant work. Didn't get into the neuroscience, didn't really get into the deeper genetics. And that's really where that was a launching pad for what the last 20 years of my work. But he proposed, I love it. He proposed that there must be, you look at a pool of bacteria, 1,000 of the same bacteria, somewhere between 3, 4, 5% of those bacteria are wired differently to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. And it makes
adapt first.
So you're in a pool of water, little happy bacteria in there, and it's, sunny and it's, 82 degrees all the time and everything's great. What happens when there's an ice age? 98% of them are toast, but there's 2% that are just enough different that they adapt very rapidly to this changing environment. And he said, maybe that's ADD. maybe. And on top of all of this, and so at the same time, as I'm looking at all this interesting neuroscience and functional MRIs and getting all geeked out on it, I'm doing this profound work in trauma healing and really understanding that a lot of what ADD and ADHD is a trauma response. We're hyperactive. We are stuck in, Peter Levine, who was actually by chance my doctoral chairperson's roommate at Berkeley. So I got into Peter Levine's world 30 years ago. And so it has been an undertone of really trying to understand what the hell we are. And, that's what I wrote Driven about, is really we are designed epigenetically to live in a more trauma-filled world. And when the Ice Age begins, or when Civil War begins, or when, the super volcano goes off, we are the ones, we meaning the Drivens, we are, have a different brain structure, different reward system we'll get into, but we're the ones who are going to figure it out. And so you see this combination of kind of adaptations to trauma, and epigenetically, you look at us over a period of time within groups. You see groups of, Drivens are very, in particular in the Judeo-Jewish communities, you see a lot of the Drivens. But you think about it, that's transgenerational trauma that actually is turning on and off these genetics and brain structures. So we are, we're a bunch of monkeys. And what happens in our mother's, when we're in mommy's tummy, her uterine environment is the thing that is triggering a lot of these genetics. And so it is an adaptation to both trauma and just a traumatized world. And byproduct of that is that we love chaos. We are really good in chaos. We are prone to create chaos. And, we work exceptionally well under pressure. And pressure actually makes us calmer.
Yeah, amen to that. That's one of the biggest thing I learned is we like to live in a chaotic world. And is that in a way we're kind of wired, like the brain is the wiring, the body's wired that way. And if it's not traumatic or fearful, like I like one of your quotes is we're like rabbits wired for a world of hawks, but living in a peaceful valley.
Exactly. Exactly. And
so we're always on edge, even though there's no hawks.
And it is a combination of both the genetics, which I get into in Driven, the dopamine receptor number 2. We'll talk about that first. It's boredom. And, going with the hunter-farmer theory, it kind of adapts, it is most of the human species has adapted to a sedentary, slow, predictable, linear world.
The way you just said is hurting my ears already.
Exactly. And that's my joke about, I'm unemployable. I'm sure you are too.
Oh, very much so.
Because it's cubicle hell and you go, office space and that, I mean, it is not for us.
Hmm.
And, we are, because what happens is we imagine ourselves in a cubicle for 8 hours a day for 3 weeks in a row. We want to start cutting our wrists, but it's because of the sensations in our body. We start to feel this achy, I don't like this. There's something wrong with this feeling in our body. And that's when our dopamine starts to drop. And it feels impending doomish. It feels like there's an impending doom, other shoes about to drop, this feeling like, it feels like I forgot to do my homework, but didn't even
So
think about it.
are you saying if we're safe, everything's going well, our dopamine drops and we feel doom?
Correct. We are waiting for the next ice age. It is.
That's just the way we're wired. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is.
Like,
That is the way we're wired, and it is what we are. Good thing, and I teach all of this stuff around, well, those are just feelings, and feelings aren't facts. It's not reality.
right.
It's really about, and that's why I'm such a big proponent of meditation, but not relaxation type meditation. It's driven meditation, where meditation is about reality checking your emotion. Is
Mm.
what's happening in my body an accurate reflection of my immediate environment? And so
So
it's
meditation is about reality checking emotions.
reality testing. Exactly. A byproduct of that, because usually 99.9999% of the time, the present moment is safe.
Right.
And there's no cave bears, there's no saber-tooth tigers. But, the brain structure, well, the other genetic that I write about and talk about is the dopamine receptor number 4, and that's the FOMO gene,
You're
fear of
missing
missing
out.
out gene. And it is the grass is greener over the next hill gene,
Yeah.
shiny object gene.
Always better. Can always be better.
Always better. And that the hunter is, if the farmer felt that, they would always be looking for better ground to grow stuff on.
Oh, yeah.
So they would leave, right? If the hunter didn't feel that, we would kill all of the game right here and we'd starve.
Right.
So literally, we are wired to think there's more woolly mammoths or more game over the next hill. And so it's also called, great expose on it in National Geographic, called the wandering gene. And
Yeah,
it
I've heard of
traces
that.
this
Yeah.
genetic back all the way. And it's, well, I love to travel. And yeah, that's your
Yeah.
gene.
Well,
And the
that's what I
travel,
got. I need to be on the move all the time. If I don't travel anytime soon, I get anxious.
yeah, and that is that drop in dopamine. And
Oh,
it's
it's the
feeling
drop in
like there's
dopamine.
yeah,
Ah,
it's a feeling like there's something wrong. That's why I teach all my drivens that we have to have something to look forward to.
yeah.
If I have something to look forward to, I can tolerate a lot more of the farmer's world. But if I don't have that to look forward to, start to get that trapped feeling, and then I have this F it button where I'll plus bang, blow up my world, and I will sabotage my world to create chaos and create change. And so it's a
Yeah, that
very
makes a lot of
important
sense.
understanding about how these things work, so you don't fall victim to them.
Right.
Being
Like,
driven is being what we are, is a curse. Many of us, these are the addictive genetics. These are the addictive genes.
yeah.
And what gets people really in trouble is the brain structure, gets them in my office. So you put normals in a functional MRI, the farmers in a functional MRI. 90% of people have something called an executive function in their brain.
Yep.
Left prefrontal, nice little ball of energy right here.
The
And
filter.
executive function does, it's truly a CEO of the brain. It tunes out information. Doesn't
Hmm.
tune into information, it tunes out information. It's a filtering.
Yeah.
Think about, the CEO of McDonald's worries a lot about hamburgers, doesn't worry about tacos.
Right.
And so tacos go by, it doesn't even think about them. It doesn't even register. You put us in a functional MRI, the back of our heads light up.
Yes.
We have occipital dominance, meaning that the back of our head, the occipital lobe, is where eyesight is, vision. That's why our brains, we can walk into a room and boo, something's
See
different.
everything.
Everything. And if you think about a hunter, we are wired for that opportunistic. We need to scan the big picture of the environment.
Which today is you're accused of not paying attention and have an attention problem.
Correct. And I don't have an attention deficit. I have an attention abundance.
Exactly.
So
I
it's
get
really,
accused every time I go to a job site or whatever. I scan. Once I realized I was a scanner and everything comes in visually, I just see everything and everyone's blown away by it or jealous by it. It's kind of
yeah.
cool to get an understanding of this.
And then the frontal lobe, which is what gets us into real trouble. The frontal lobe, you put a normal in a functional MRI, they have that ball of energy that's tuning out most things.
Mhm.
But they're paying attention to maybe three different things at the same time. Put Navy SEALs in a functional MRI, which is our brain. We can pay attention to 9 to 13 things at the same time.
Yep. Is that what you call the multi-thinking?
Multi-thinking. And so we are able to actually visually track 13 different things at the same time.
Yep.
And my latest research on it is even though the brain structure is nearly identical in most people's brains, we have literally a different operating system called the deep modal network. And that it's connecting it's connecting 3 times as many parts, 4 times faster.
Right.
So the normal brain is, DOS way back.
Yeah.
We got ISO 37 or whatever it is. We are literally designed to work in a much more rapidly changing environment, being able to track it, we're made for chaos.
And in emergency situations, intense, urgent situations, like to me, the world just slows down and everything just slowly comes to me in that time. And I can pick out nuances and subtleties.
Yeah. And that's called neuropeptide Y. That is one of the neuropeptide Y. It is the best predictor for anyone who can make it through BUDS, become a Navy SEAL. And it is a hyper-focus it's a peptide. It's hyper-focused peptide. And it connects a whole bunch of different parts of that operating system.
Right.
All of a sudden. And most importantly, it resets our reward centers.
Ah.
And so it is a really interesting thing because it's designed. That's why, Edison, who was one of us, 9,999 different ways to not make a light bulb, but I know I can make it.
Right.
Most people start to get disappointed after 2 or 3 trials and failures. Neuropeptide Y lets us to reset our central nervous system and focus on the future. So you're chasing a rabbit gets away. Oh, bummer. Ooh, another rabbit, squirrel. Yeah. And that resets us into this, well, this time I think it's going to work. And that can get you in real trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's not harnessed. Been there, done that.
And it's one of the root things in alcoholism that, you can't remember the consequences of a day or a week or a month ago. This time's going to be different. And that's one of the defining features of alcoholism. So we are unique. We are different creatures.
And is it a smaller percentage of the population this way, or do you have an idea? Because like for me, once I read this book, I was understood. Someone understood me, and it's still in the entrepreneurial world. I think there's a smaller portion of the entrepreneurial world that are driven.
It cracks me up now. Entrepreneurship, like Gary V in this one, entrepreneurship used to mean you're unemployed.
Yeah.
Used to not be a badge of honor or badge, it's like, dude, what are you doing? Oh, I'm trying to start a business. They looked at you like you were, a big wishful thinker and hoping something would do. Now you have, programs at Harvard and Stanford and everything in entrepreneurship, which I think is hilarious, trying to teach non-drivens entrepreneurship. And it is, but that, being aside, ADD, ADHD is much larger category than driven.
Hmm.
in that there's a lot of people who are diagnosed with ADD and ADHD that are simply traumatized,
Yeah.
and they are stuck in, fight flight. And so it
Hmm.
looks like, they're very distractible or whatever, but they're actually don't have the driven brain. They have an executive function. And once they get the trauma treated, they go back to the W-2 job.
Correct. Yeah. Same idea with anxiety and depression also has ADHD tendency symptoms
Yeah.
as
And
well.
that's the problem with the symptom model. You're not seeking understanding. But in the general population, well, Daniel Amen, who's done
Yep.
10,000
From
brains,
yep.
um, he says we're about 2 to 3% of the population.
Yeah.
And my guess is somewhere, 3%, 4% of people identify as an entrepreneur. ADD is somewhere 6 to 9%, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Um, way I define driven, because I've been working in this field now 20 years. We have a lot of people that have no executive function. I mean, they are, but the ADD, they don't have the hyperactivity. They don't have the
Yep.
dopamine number 2. They have a lot of the number 4, but then the right hemisphere, meaning that they're emotional, versus left hemisphere. And so once you start to get underneath and really try to understand, there's a lot of drivens that are hiding.
Well, just like masking yourself and building a different character to fit in.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the situational identity is what I call that. That I can be a jock or a punk or a, prep
Hmm.
or whatever, and float in between those, but never really feel like I fit in anywhere.
Right. Like for me in high school, I fit in everywhere, but belong nowhere.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's driven. That is the core of it. And to say that the real scary part of being driven is shame, this thing
Hmm.
called shame. And we go into a normal, well, the executive function does a couple of things, but one of the things it does really well is create an identity.
Yeah.
And as we went from hunter-gatherer groups, like all drivens, I'm sure of it, into these massive societies, people became things. They became butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. And you want to send a driven to hell, ask them, who are you?
Yeah.
What do you mean, who? I'm all of these things and none of these things. And what do you mean to do? But we build identity on things that are consistent in our
Mm. That-
peripheral field. And so
yeah.
what is the most consistent thing in the driven's world, particularly if you have a lot of the D2 and D4, is this impending doomy feeling of not enough.
Yeah.
And if you
Um,
build an identity on that, if you how do you know you're not enough? I feel that way, and I always feel that way. That must be me. And
right. And
that's the
therefore you self-hate.
core
Yeah.
self-hate and
Self-talk and
right. And the shame that comes out of that. And what happens is that's, always say probably 2/3 of all drivens are just whacked off in their addictions,
mhm.
gambling and sex and drugs and anything they can to get rid of that shame.
And that's induced by in a way the way society perceives you and you want to try and fit in, right? It's not just that's just a normal course of a driven brain is going to shame.
Yeah. And
Right.
it is, and it's, we don't fit in very well. Our brains think differently.
Mhm.
We see right through people living in narrative land.
Yeah.
We are different. And as chapter 1 says in my book, different is good.
I I've been fighting that since I was a 2-year-old. Difference is good. Um, man, we can go on for hours here. This is all amazing stuff. A lot of validating stuff I know to the listeners. So, driven brains, ostracized, we're seen as different. You also talk about gazelles and wolves in your book about this. I think it's a nice ender here. We were talking about, feeling ostracized, shame because of how it's perceived. What did you mean by gazelles and wolves in the herd?
Yeah, that is a great place to end. Give everybody some hope. We were talking about masterminds before we started talking on the call too. It You think about most human beings are sheep. They're a herding animal, Herd. They
Mhm.
live by little narratives, and if their narratives are similar, they tend to group together. And, then they throw rocks at other people that have different narratives. For
Yeah.
drivens, we look at that like, what the hell? Like, why can't you see through? This is ridiculous. But they don't see through it. Most importantly, what happens to a herd of gazelles when a cheetah runs into it?
They scatter, don't they?
They scatter, screw you, and you're on your own. Good luck with that cheetah. And if it eats you, I'll actually feel better about my world because I'll be safer.
And that's why they're a bigger group.
And that is why they're a massive group. And that the bigger the group, the more the safety. And so we are hunters, and we are a predatory hunter.
Mhm.
And predatory hunters, such as wolves, have a very strong attachment center, very strong need to be attached to each other. It's very simple to understand. How many gazelles does it take to catch a blade of grass? One.
One.
How many wolves does it take to kill an elk? All of them. And so this mutual interdependence is what we crave as hunters.
Mhm.
And most importantly, we are wired for that, meaning that, what happens to a pack of wolves if a bear comes in and attacks one of the wolves? What do the wolves do?
They attack back,
Yeah. And that is
protect each other.
brings tears to my eyes because it is this driven need to really believe somebody has our back. And we put that trust in sheep that are going to run when things get hard. So a lot of my guys that I worked with, gave up on other human beings. No one's got my back. And the aloneness, man, is brutal.
Yeah.
And I've been in those 7-man groups of Navy SEALs. They're usually 8, and one's missing. And it is one of the most profoundly painful experiences I've ever watched when one of your true brothers is lost.
Yeah.
Everybody it's my fault, it's my fault, it's my fault. They're all trying to say I could have done something different. And it is, but if you're out there feeling really alone and like no one has your back and you're impending doom and all this, it is my message to the world is you're made this way. We're a gift.
Yeah.
The world needs us, especially when, between cell phone and, the great Gutenberg's printing press on steroids, man. You can't hide the bullshit anymore in this world.
Yeah.
And we're getting closer and closer to chaos. And so, we need to band together as brothers and driven, and because we're the ones who are going to figure it out. And there's other drivens that are screwing the sheep over pretty well.
Yeah.
So those that want to do it right, man, that's my call to action for everybody is find me. And if you want to get a hold of me, it's iamdriven.com, all things Dr. Doug.
Yeah. And you got a nice assessment tool, a driven assessment tool, which is really cool. And you get a nice report. So I'd highly recommend to go to the website and get that done.
It's actually not a lead gen thing. I've got imposter syndrome so bad. I sent that out to a national norming agency. It's a real psychological test, and I'm actually validated it.
Mhm.
So it's not just, hey, look at this. Come take my assessment and I'll get your email. It's legit. It's interesting.
Yeah. And it's lots of great information. So, like you said earlier, the driven is we're designed epigenetically to survive in a super traumatized world or chaos.
Yep.
A drop in dopamine causes us fear, and that hit me. That really, oh my god, that's so true. So sometimes we keep ourselves on edge so that we can keep that dopamine kicking. And I really like what you said at the end there, or at the end somewhere there, that meditation is about reality testing emotions because emotions are bullshit.
Yeah.
We got to check the facts and reality.
And emotions are bullshit, but they're the most important things in the world because they
Ooh.
literally change our perception of reality.
Mm-hmm.
You're feeling scared and dopamine depleted, all you'll see is snakes and not enough.
Yeah.
And that is we are living in a projection. We are living in a simulation created between your ears.
Yeah. And for you, the listener, if you're a driven entrepreneur, you're not alone. There are many of us out there. We are not weird. They are. Let's think about it that way and find your wolf pack. And after listening to Doug here today, are you a driven entrepreneur with ADHD or just a driven entrepreneur? Either way, there's someone out there that's just like you and we're not alone. So thanks again, Doug, for joining us today.
Fantastic time.
And to you, the listener, thanks again for learning with me. We'll talk to you soon.